When I think about how my experience with caregiving started, interestingly enough, it started in a swimming pool. It was July 13th, 1993. I was living in Chapel Hill. I was 41 years old. I was divorced, but I was in a pretty good relationship. I had a business that was doing reasonably well. And, summer day, I was, middle of the afternoon, I was about waist deep in a swimming pool, had about half a cold beer in my hand. And I finished the beer and I got out of the pool, I dried off, and I walked over to my apartment to get another beer. And when I walked into the apartment, the phone on the wall was ringing. Y'all remember phones on the wall? Remember
Yes,
those?
we do.
And so I walked over and picked up the phone, and it was my mother. And in a very calm voice, she started explaining to me that that morning my father had had a heart attack. And she had called the EMTs, and they had popped him about half a dozen times and brought him back. And they were getting ready to life flight him from Lumberton, North Carolina, which was where I'm from, up to Duke University Medical Center, which was about 10 miles from where I was standing right then. And that was my introduction to the issue of caregiving. I mean, almost immediately, my mind my heart was going, oh my gosh, how's Daddy doing? And especially how's Mama doing? But she's so calm explaining this to me. And so then immediately I'm thinking, okay, need to get Mom up here. And I started kind of running through a to-do list in my head. Um, but that was kind of my beginning of an experience with caregiving, and it's lasted now about 30 years. My father passed away about 8 months later. My mother passed away in 2015 after we had a caregiving experience with her that lasted about three and a half years. But what's intriguing about this, guys, is I live in a condominium community in Raleigh. Right now, there are two people within 150 yards of where we live who need care. One, and I took him to the grocery store yesterday, and I'll take him on errands and that sort of thing. But the other is a woman who had a dog who just this on Saturday, they had to put the dog down. She is distraught. She does not get along with her daughter, who is her only family member. So what we've got are neighbors who are stepping in to try to help her and take care of her. She has some serious medical issues. So, this thing of caregiving surrounds us. And if it's an issue that is happening in your family, then I think that there are a variety of things that you can do to, if not make the experience easier, at least it makes it such that you can kind of move through it. And there are a couple of things we're going to talk about today that I think are keenly important in terms of making sure that you take care of yourself and that you move through the experience in a positive way.
Well, hello, this is Don,
And this is Gina with Focused Healthy Family.
and this is podcast number 142. Today we are talking with Mike Collins, the author of Caregiving, that Caregiving Can Make Life Crazy, and Caregiving 101 ways to make caregiving from making, oh boy,
Start over.
we're going to get past this. So anyway, Caregiving 101 ways to make
Keep caregiving can make you crazy.
There you go. Thank you, Mike.
You're very welcome.
You
You're very welcome.
Finish this
Glad
up
to
there. I was even going to try to read your award here. Oh my gosh, this is. I'm going to pass this over to my wife and let her handle it because she can handle it much better than I can.
That's fine. Take your time. Take your time.
Mike Collins is an award-winning author, speaker, and video producer. He was caregiver for both of his parents, along with his brother, Joe. In addition to Caregiving Can Make Life Crazy, he's the author of Caregiving 101, 101 Ways to Keep Caregiving from Making You Crazy. Okay. His video, Care for the Caregiver, was awarded a National Caregiver Friendly Award from Today's Caregiver magazine. In 2024, the Governor's Office of the State of North Carolina awarded Collins the Order of the Long Life Leaf Pine, the state's highest award for persons who have made significant contributions to the state and their communities through their exemplary service and exceptional accomplishments. So welcome, Mike Collins.
Thank you.
That was good.
Delighted to be here. Delighted to be here.
Glad to have you here as we caregiving is a big part of what we talk about here, and we've also been going through these experiences ourselves. So,
Yeah, what you were talking about with your parents, well, we've gone through quite a bit of that different stuff like that too. So we
Yeah.
kind of get that. Um, I wanted to kind of step in for a moment because I was looking over your latest book, and in it you talk about the crazy inn, and as I was reading it, I was trying to kind of get an idea of it's about it's almost two different sides to it, is it not, when you talk about it?
Let me tell you, let's start for a second and talk about where the word crazy came from.
Okay.
Uh, I did a program about 2 or 3 years ago, and it was for a healthcare organization. And the person who introduced me was one of these one of these big dog doctors, with a bunch of letters after their names. And I'm sure their mom and daddy's proud of them about all those letters and everything. But he was up there and he was very nice as far as his introduction. And as he finished the introduction of me, and there were about 300 people in the audience, he started to step away from the podium and then he stepped back. And he said, "But I've got to tell you," he said, "this thing about the word crazy," he said, "I just don't think that's a positive thing, blah, blah, blah." And he went on. Well, when I got up to the podium and I thanked him for his introduction, and I said, "Let me explain where the word crazy came from." In the middle of the 1850s, the writer Ralph Waldo Emerson talked about the fact that in our lives, we create what he called the vast background of our being. And it's all of the experiences we have in our lives and that sort of thing. And those experiences kind of prepare us a lot of times for things that happen in our lives. And 100 years later, a writer and Thomas Moore here in America. Moore is a psychotherapist and he has been a Buddhist monk. And Moore said, there are times we experience things in our lives that vast background of our being that Emerson talked about don't prepare us for. And he said, those things just make us crazy. And so that's where the word crazy came from. And so this thing about it making us crazy, let me offer this as an example. Let's say somebody came to you and they said, "Here's the deal. In 24 hours, you're going to have to take a physics exam." Now, you can look up online anything you want to look up about physics. You can call anybody you know who has been educated in it or knows about it or whatever, but you're going to have to take this exam in 24 hours. And how you score on that exam, how well you do, is going to determine a lot about what your life is going to be like in the near term. I think that is a lot of what caregiving being put into the experience and that craziness is about. Now, let me jump back to the program that I was doing when the guy introduced me and I explained to the group what I meant by crazy. 300 people in that room. I said, "How many of you are family caregivers? Please raise your hand if you either are a family caregiver, you've been a family caregiver, or you can see it coming in your future." I said, "Raise your hand." Well, out of about 300 people, I'm guessing about 200 of them or more raised their hands. Now, here's the best part of the story. I said, "I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask it like any Southerner might ask it." I said, "How many of you think caregiving just makes you damn slap crazy?" And out of that 200 plus people, I said, "Raise your hands if you think that." At least 190 raised their hands. And of the ones who didn't raise their hands, they were staring at their telephone and texting to somebody what I just said. So, I think that's how a lot of times we come to the experience. A lot of times, like mine, it comes in a phone call. Somebody calls you and says, "Here's something that's happened." It could happen with that person you love right next to you, and boom, all of a sudden something happens, and they're having an experience that is going to make you a caregiver. And so, and that's why I say it's very much like this physics test thing, because so often we don't really know what we need to do to help the other person and to move through the experience. Does that kind of explain what,
Yeah, no, it does,
it,
because I mean, you experienced it a couple of weeks ago with me, falling out, having to, do all kinds of things to me to get me back into shape again. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, crazy. My goodness.
Yeah, and I know, we have one of our kids is very politically correct or whatever. She's always correcting us on terminology and what's offensive. And, I'm an occupational therapist. I studied all kinds of psychology classes in school. And, they don't use that term anymore because it was used in a derogatory manner in like
Correct.
psychiatric settings. And
Right.
yet I I totally get where you're coming from. And yeah, sometimes life is just crazy. It's just
Right.
trying to make sense out of stuff out of nowhere. And so, yeah, I like you kind of rebranding the word there. And I think it's well fitting. And then you're taking it from literature, actually. So it's,
Well, one of the things yeah, your point's well taken about just kind of rebranding that term. And in doing so, I think a lot of times what we have to do is take a step back and say, okay, if this is the experience, how do we deal with the experience?
Hmm.
Um, and one of the things, if I might just kind of take off on a little bit of tangent here, one of the things that I came to understand is a concept that I call the 5 H's.
Hmm.
Caregiving hits us in what I call the 5 H's, and it's kind of in this order. Yeah, it hits us in the heart first, our emotions. Then it hits us, and with some people, they have a difficult time moving through that part, and that part keeps jumping back at us. But then our head, we start thinking, okay, now logically, what have I got to do to be able to deal with this situation? Well, if it keeps going over a period of time, it will start impacting our health. And then you got to start asking yourself, how does this impact our homes, our home life, if we have children, if those sorts of things. And then the final H is I use the word hands, meaning your workplace. If you're working, how does caregiving impact your workplace? And what we're seeing now are so many folks in that Gen X group are taking care of parents and they're taking care of children. They're in that sandwich generation, and stress level is even higher. So I do think this issue of understanding how to deal with caregiving and how to move through these experiences. There are millions and millions of people in America now that there's something like, depending on who you look to as far as sources, uh, there are folks who talk about from somewhere between 45 and 70 million people in America who are caregivers. Now that puts it at about 1 in 5 Americans are caregivers. I mean, if you look at where you guys are in Salisbury, North Carolina, if you look at the Metrolina area, there's essentially somewhere around 1.2 million people in your region who are caregivers.
I believe it. I mean, it's and I'm right there. I'm Gen X and yes, we are, our youngest child is 15
Hmm.
and our 22-year-old had to move back home and just dealt with my dad with Parkinson's who just
Oh my
recently
gosh.
passed. And it was the dementia that came on later with the Parkinson's that made it really challenging for him. And yeah, we moved my parents up to Salisbury because we moved up here and so to make it easier.
Yeah.
On us. So yeah, I love the 5 H's that you described because that's yeah, it makes it very clear in my head.
I think
Well,
that there are things we can do in each one of those categories that kind of help us deal with each one, you know.
mhm.
And again, I think that, and that's why I love the fact that y'all have got this podcast. I think what you have to do is, it's difficult for some people to step back, and because they don't believe they have the time or the energy or whatever to
Mhm.
take a step back. But I think you have to kind of take a step back and say, okay, what am I facing and how do I deal with this? I mean, that's your head kind of going
Mm-hmm.
after.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
What have
the other,
y'all,
when you talk about hands too, what are you going to do about your work?
right?
That's because I've had people that are long distance that have to figure out, do I want to continue to work or do I need to come home somehow? That's another whole play
Sure.
right there that just needs to be kind of figured out. And it could, well, Gina's been the caregiver right now for us. I mean, she's been that way for for a long time for us. And now I even the work I had going is stopped. And so we're gonna have to kind of refigure things and regroup ourselves again, probably for the 400th time it feels like sometimes.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've found, I'll give you an example. I have owned my own business for almost 40 years. My brother works for a tech company, and I'm not going to go through his history. My brother's just an absolute hero. But Joe works in corporate America. And so we were kind of in an interesting situation in that I'm trying to figure out how does what we're going through impact what I do. And then he was in a situation, though, that he could go to his boss and say, here's something I'm running into. There are going to be some responsibilities I'm going to have. And the boss understood that sort of thing. We're running into situations now in the American workplace where there so many folks in the workplace are caregivers that it's highly likely that if you go to your boss and say, here's what I'm running into, they're gonna get it. They're gonna get it pretty quickly, and they can start saying, all right, do we have an organization? Do we have an organizational culture in which we're going to help you kind of move through this? Or do we have an organizational culture that says, well, we're sorry, but here's what you got to get done. And as a caregiver, you've got to understand, well, which culture is it and how do you deal with that? And with my situation I mean, I would have seminars that I was driving across the state to and flying somewhere to, and Joe would say, okay, look, I got you covered on this part. And I would say, great, okay, I got you covered on this part. Some people don't have the benefit of those relationships, and I certainly understand that. I mean, it's like the woman down the street from us is relying on people who were total strangers to step in and help. I mean, we had people in this neighborhood, we put it out on the neighborhood network thing, that she had to have her dog put down. And she did not have the money to be able to do that. So we had neighbors. My friend Lily and I kicked in some, and other neighbors kicked in some, and we were able to make this sort of thing happen for her. But some people have those benefits, and other people don't. I mean, it's everybody's in a different situation because they're an individual. And sometimes they have help, sometimes they don't. Sometimes their stress is to the max. Sometimes they can find ways to ease down. But it is a challenge, and we're not cultures like the Spartans and others a couple of thousand years ago, where if you had somebody who was down and out, you took them and put them out on the mountainside and said, see you. We don't, you know, hopefully we don't do that, but
Yeah, I hope not. My gosh, I would have been put out some years ago. Ah,
Yeah, you're talking about relationships, and the relationships families have amongst themselves and how that affects the situation when all of a sudden you got to be a caregiver for somebody. And
absolutely.
yeah, it can be. I mean, I'm fortunate that my brother, like your brother, he works for a big pharmaceutical company, and he had the ability to fly down when my dad was in his last hours, really, and be there and work from home some. And my sister has her own business, so she juggled around things. And I've worked as needed for a while in the healthcare industry, so I can call out whenever I want, but I also then don't have a paycheck when I do that.
Sure.
Um, so, juggling in these different, but that we were all able to come together, that we were all kind of on the same page with my dad's care when we decided to go to hospice care. And but yeah, I see, the work I do. I've been an occupational therapist for over 30 years, working mostly in adult and geriatric rehab. And I meet a lot of families, and some of them they pull together. Some of them there's just one, sometimes there's more than one sibling, but one of them's doing everything.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
just it's put on them. It's often the female, and everyone just, you're going to take care of it and you're going to do things. And and then you have those really contentious relationships where it's really difficult because the relationship they already had with whether it's their parent or whatever um, was not the healthiest relationship, and that they were at odds with each other, like it sounds like your neighbor with her daughter, and it makes things more stressful for everybody
Right.
involved. And yeah,
You made a good point. If I can jump into that for a
sure.
second, this thing about yeah, the phrase you used a second ago was excuse me, it's often a woman in the family. Um, this issue of caregiving hit me to the point that in the late 90s and early 2000s, I did a master's at Duke University, and my focus was family caregiver wellness. Now, when I got a master's, I was 50 years old. And my thesis at the very end of the master's was the difference in how men and women experience caregiving. Now, what's intriguing about this to me, because it's been about 25 years since I did that paper, is that now that the ratio of caregivers in America has changed kind of dramatically. At one time, it was like way female, and now it's about 55% female and about 45% male. Now, part of that has been because of a fairly dramatic and kind of scary rise in the incidence of Alzheimer's in females. And what you've ended up with is a lot of husbands and a lot of companions who are male now are the caregiver for that woman. But your point is well taken in that in so many families, you'll have people who just kind of let that other person take care of everything. And one of the things that I push a lot of family members to think about is, can you have discussions? I mean, if you've got somebody who lives in California and the family lives in North Carolina, it's difficult for that California person to buzz in every weekend, but can they contribute financially to care in such a way that whoever's there most of the time, they catch a break? And there's some, and they've got some care on an hourly basis or that sort of stuff. So there are ways that family members can help, even if they can't show up in person. And a lot of times, you're exactly right. A lot of times it means that you've got to have some of these, what we in the South call come to Jesus talks about, how's this thing going to work? And, I mentioned earlier that thing about being individuals. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
Well, we tried to talk, I've done some, I want to do some talks on the long distance traveler, because money is one thing, but they can call,
Right.
every day, both for the caregiver and for the caree.
Right.
But they can also do research. Her brother did a lot of research for us, and where to put people, what to do with things, things. So there's a lot of things they can do, and that we have to really, like you say, come to that talk with Jesus kind of
Come to
thing. But
Jesus talk.
talk to them about it, because you can't. One person cannot do it themselves
Right.
without turning into that carry themselves, at some point. So it is very important to have all that behind them.
Well, one of the things that Joe and I did, as far as where our mother was going to be, she was in a care center for a while, and then we decided, well, let's get her an apartment here in Raleigh and have, people who would come in and stay a number of hours, and then one of us might spend the night with her, and then somebody else would come in. Well, a lot of times I was doing the research on which apartment complexes we were going to try to have her in, because Joe was working. He had to go into the office every day. And so it is trying to maybe trade off some of those responsibilities, as you will. But yeah, if y'all could, if it's okay with you two, can we kind of jump into this 5 H's thing and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Sure, I'd love to.
I was talking about the heart part of it, and usually that's the first area that you're hit in. I mean, it could be a phone call, could be anything like that. There are some ways that you can kind of help yourself as far as your heart is concerned. And since when you're talking about emotions, I tell people all the time, if you're going to be a caregiver, you need to start remembering positive experiences you had with that loved one. It could be something, if you haven't already put together some sort of a photo album or something like that, can you do that? Another way, Don, what you just said a second ago about people connecting with you by phone on a daily basis. One of the wonderful things now about technology is Zoom.
Oh,
You're not just hearing that person's voice, you're seeing them. And I'll give it to you from a kind of two-sided, because I've had some people talk to me about this. They have said that I didn't realize what Mama's condition really was until my sister got us on a Zoom call, and I could watch Mama and how Mama was reacting
Yeah.
during the call. So, but again, going back to the positive side, one of the best ways that you can help your heart is try to remember the good stuff, the good experiences, and not just let the stress of this sort of thing, pull your emotions down. The second part is your head and trying to be a little more organized as far as what you've got to deal with. The basis of my business life has been seminars and seminars mostly all over the country. And a lot of it has been based on what's called the perfect workday. I did a book called The Perfect Workday. I do a seminar and that sort of thing. And when I talk about getting things done, that issue of having a to-do list, what are the different things you need to do to be able to get done so that you can be a good caregiver? The tough thing here is a lot of times we end up with this voluminous list of all these things we've got to get done. Two researchers from Princeton did an interesting study a couple of years ago, and they found that the average American has about 137 things in their head that they think they need to be getting done. And it's everything from empty the trash to get an advanced degree. Well, all of a sudden you're a caregiver, and man, that list starts getting a lot longer, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And there, psychologists and Buddhist monks found that if you have more than 10 things on a to-do list and you're looking at it, that all of a sudden your eyes will jump from number 2 down to number 13, and from 13 back up to number 5 and down to number 12, and that sort of. Well, after a while, your brain starts locking up. So what you have to do is start figuring out what are the most important things, the priorities that you really need to work on. But from a head standpoint, the more you can kind of keep a list of here's the things I've got to get done. I tell people all the time. Well, I tell them this when I talk to them about starting a small business. But the second thing you need to do if you're a caregiver is buy a notebook and start keeping track of the different things. Look at Gina nodding her head.
Yeah,
Exactly
I
what I'm
was going
talking
to say
about.
that too.
You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
I
she's,
Yeah.
am
Yeah.
on it. I got a notebook.
Say again.
Got notebooks with my dad's name, Don's name. My daughter decided to go to public school this year. Yeah, notebooks. I love. Yep, write it all
Yeah.
down.
And I got to tell you, most folks, Jen, and I look at life from an 80-20 standpoint. 80% of the folks out there are nowhere near as organized as you're talking about being, you know? And
mm-hmm.
that whole thing, for a lot of people, that whole thing about a to-do list, is something that they have, they just have an aversion to doing it. But you've got to find a way to be keeping up with all this stuff that you've got to do. The third area is your health, because if it goes on long enough, then it starts impacting your health if you're not careful. There's a concept that was, and it started by about a decade ago. There was a professor up north who talked about that caregivers were the invisible patients. And there was at the time, up until probably maybe just a decade to 15 years ago, you take mama to the doctor. Well, the doctor's all focused on mama, but you're sitting over there in the corner and you're wasting away. And doctors have gotten a lot better over about the past little bit of a decade or more of looking at the caregiver and saying, well, how are you doing? And so I found that if you're a caregiver from a health standpoint, the three things you can do best for yourself, none of them involve tequila. Let me go ahead and say that up front. But way to go, Gene. I'm proud of you. But three things. One is drink more water. If your hydration level drops by 2 to 3%, it inhibits your ability to do simple math. It inhibits your reaction time coming up on stop signs, stoplights. Here's a wild one. If you get dehydrated, people don't realize this. Your skin dries out and your skin starts creating these little fissures, these little cracks in your skin where it's dry. Well, it makes you way more accessible to germs coming in and you getting sick. So one is drink more water. Second is try to move more. And third is trying to get more rest, which for a lot of caregivers, it's difficult to do, but you kind of got to grab it when you can sometimes. But the health thing is so huge. And then as far as home, the more you can let your family know, here's how this sort of stuff is probably going to impact us. And if you've got young children, you got to understand that sometimes they're going to get it, sometimes they won't, sometimes they do get it, and then at times that doesn't seem they do. But how can your family help you out? And then finally, that work thing, like we already talked about a little bit, is making sure that folks in your workplace know what you're up against, because a lot of them are up against the same thing. And don't just assume that they're going to cut you a whole lot of slack just because you're a caregiver. They're going to expect you to carry your weight. So you kind of got, I tell you, one of the best things you can do as a caregiver in the workplace is try to figure out, how do I do an exemplary job so that when I need to reach out and say, I need 2 days off, they're going to be cool with that. But,
Yeah.
but I find that the 5 H's a lot of times will let people in a little bit more organized way look at what's going on with them and
Mhm.
how they can kind of deal with each one of these areas.
Mhm.
How's that sound? Does that sound logical?
It
Oh
does.
yeah,
It
no.
does. And I appreciate that you sent us the copy of your newest book. And I was reading through a lot of it, and it's very easy to read. I'll do a little promo on your book,
Okay.
and it flowed so naturally, like you said, a conversation. And yeah, we've been talking about caregiving for a long time. I've been, in my professional life, and then with family issues. Um, and yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me, because so Don had a heart attack 3 weeks ago,
Hmm.
and he went into full cardiac arrest.
Oh
And
my gosh.
the first thing was my heart. I was freaking out.
Hmm.
And and
But you got into your head pretty quickly after
well, yeah,
that.
I called 911
Somebody,
again. He had already called 911 because he was feeling funny. Don's symptoms of a heart attack are not typical. He felt
Oh,
funny. He thought he was sick. The last when he had his first heart attack, he had pain in his upper back and into his neck, and it was down his right arm, not the left arm. So yeah, there are atypical symptoms.
yeah, my surgeon at the time said I went through a heart attack like a girl. I
Yeah,
was like,
like
oh,
a
thank
like a
you. Yeah,
woman. Women often tend to have
yeah.
atypical symptoms. But yeah, this just I wasn't feeling right, because I even asked you, "You having chest pain?" He said no. Um, and he was having a massive heart attack. But yeah, then I jumped
Ooh.
in, and when I called 911 again, she's like, "You got to get him on the floor to start CPR." And I've done CPR training for years and never actually had to use it. And
Banged my head against the
yeah,
ceiling
I
too, by
mean,
the
I
way.
literally pulled him off the bed to the ground, like, okay, just jump in and do compressions, Gina. It doesn't matter, just start doing them. But so yeah, when you're talking about the heart and the head, that's and then the the dealing with things and getting our daughters to call our son because they're knowing he could step in and help out, and just making phone calls to people and all those. Yeah, then you spend all that time in your head in the hospital and negotiating the care and following the treatment plans and follow up and what needs to happen. So
Well, and it all kind of goes in different order too. I mean,
yeah,
you've got it set up that
yeah,
way, and
yeah,
that's initially how it works. But then you jump back up to the heart,
sure.
then it's into the
exactly,
head, then it's at home, then it's back here. It's all over the place, which is
Right.
exactly,
Right.
exactly. Can I ask an odd question?
Sure.
Hey, Don, since it seems that Gina probably saved your life, now are you making sure that she's getting flowers now on a regular basis? I
I can't even
believe,
get out of the house. I mean, let alone
Ed,
get. But I
I
guess like
know,
yeah.
I would know what she wanted for Christmas. I would know that. Well,
Uh,
congratulations, Gina, on stepping up. No kidding. I mean, that's heroic. Way to go. Way to go.
Well,
well,
and
this
the thing is, I knew, medics were already on their way. And the thing is, if you have a heart attack, you really need the defibrillator. Because if your heart's out of rhythm, no amount of CPR is going to fix that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
well,
I was doing it going until the medic gets here.
well,
But
the medic was up there like 2 minutes, like 5 minutes away from here, which is really was very lucky for me.
No kidding.
But
No
but
kidding.
and I'm gonna on Gina's part of this, she's done this. This is the third time. Now the middle time wasn't a heart attack, but it was. I start feeling numbness in the top of my my extremities here, and before I could even finish the line, she grabbed me and said, "We're going to the hospital now." You know, so she has always been there. Covering all bases because it when the first one happened, it was the young kids were there, and it was the so it's been we've had a long journey of a
A
lot
lot
of
of
different things.
crazy, a
Yeah.
whole lot of crazy.
whole
Yeah.
lot of
Just
crazy. Hey, that may be the title of my next book. A whole lot of
a whole lot
crazy.
of crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you never are fully prepared. Even I've, been a therapist. I've done, 30 years or more because I did it in school of CPR training. And then when it happens, it's like, because afterward, I'm like, I don't think I did that right. I don't think I was pressing hard enough. It's like, yeah, when you're thrown into something, it doesn't even matter if you've had that training or that background or that knowledge, that urgency of an emergency. Like I can imagine, when your mom called you, and I love, you talked about how calm she was, and I'm sure in your
Oh
mind
yeah.
you're going, how is she staying so calm? How is she?
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah, it was because and it was almost an out of body type of experience. And I've explained this to some people. I almost felt like I was at a remove from reality because as she's explaining it and I'm understanding the words she's saying, but I'm thinking, wait a minute, is this what she's really telling me? That kind
mhm.
of thing.
Mhm.
And then when I hung up, there was a moment in which I thought, I thought, how many beers have I had? And, you know,
Was
and
that a real
so
conversation?
yeah, that's exactly what I thought. And then your head gets in, and I think, okay, what have I got to do to be able to step up and deal with this? But um, but I'm proud of y'all as far as how you both handled your situation. Way to go, way to go.
Yeah, I'm happy for that too, tell you the truth, because but I think well, it was just a lot, and like I said, crazy is the middle of
Well,
our
yeah,
name.
because then he's
So,
recovering from the heart attack and he has a stroke, and it's like, okay, now we got this to figure out and deal with. And
well, as you saw, I just handed my notes over to my wife because I was like, I'm screwing up here, and I'm not going to keep going with this just at this point.
Good idea, right? Yeah. It's it's the thing about it, when I look back and look at the issue of caregiving and just the variety of experiences and the way that it can open up if you're smart. Now I'm gonna rephrase this. If you're smart, your ability to look at some of the experiences and have these experiences help you grow as a person. I will have to say that that doesn't happen to everybody,
Mhm.
but when you start looking at how it can help you grow as a person, for instance, I can't see if it hadn't happened to me in the way it did. Um, I don't see me having been involved in caregiving for 30 years and written 2 books and done a video and all this other stuff. But what hit me was how unprepared I was
Mhm.
for the experience. And I remember my dad lasted about 8 months until March of '94. I lasted about 90 days. I walked into my doctor's office and I had a list of 8 signs of depression on a sheet of paper. And my doc at the time was a guy named Gary Bean, who was my physician for 35 years. He's retiring at the end of this month. And uh, and I held it up and I said, Bean, this is me right now. And I said, you got to figure out a way to help me. And he knows that I'm not really big on taking a handful of meds. So Bean started talking about this concept that he called the fun energy connection. And he started saying, look, you tend to be somebody who I've done skydiving and a bunch of other stuff and everything. And he knew that. And he said, what you need to do is look at there are about 5 times during your day that you can kind of find this fun energy connection. And he said, it's when you get up, one of the first things you need to do is find something positive to experience, something to see or hear or read or whatever. And then he said, about halfway through your morning, just take a break. 2 minutes, 2 minutes just to take a little bit of break. Now, one of the coolest pieces of research about this was nurses in emergency rooms in big city hospitals. And they asked them to take a 2 minute break in between when they came on duty and when the meal break was or whatever. And they found that some of the nurses would go into broom closets and close the doors, and they would do deep breathing, or they would listen to a song that lifted them up, or things like that. What they found was that after about 2 years doing a study, they found that stress levels went down, heart rates went down, blood pressure went down. I mean, it was like if you hook them up to an EKG, you'd see them in a much better shape. So that was the break. Taking a break was the second thing. He said at lunch, at least one day a week, do something healthy. Take a walk, eat something healthy, whatever, at least one day a week. Then a break middle of the afternoon. And then at the very end of the day, find some way to look back on the day and find two things that went right. Two things that went right. And so I started doing that, and it started putting me in a much more positive frame of mind as far as dealing with the type of things I had to deal with. And so, it's difficult when you've got all this stuff coming at you. And I'll go back to my metaphor as far as the physics exam. You know, you can call anybody you want to, you can talk to anybody you want to, but you're going to have to take this test. And how you do on the test is going to be how things are going to be for a while. And so you've got to kind of think. Let me offer this. There was a phrase that my mother used a lot and throughout her life. When I was a little boy, I would be going off to play with friends, and Mama would say, "You take care of you." And it got to be a thing that you take care of you. When I was getting ready to get on a bus to go to a high school football game or go over to the stadium on a Friday night to play and stuff, before I walked out the door, she'd say, "You take care of you." She said the same thing in the parking lot when they dropped me off for my freshman year in college. And even as an adult, she would say, "You take care of you." About 2 weeks before she passed away, I went to the care center where she was, and I was kind of visiting with her, and she was not really communicative or whatever. But before I left, I leaned down to hug her, and she whispered something in my ear. What do you think she whispered?
You take care of
You
you.
take care of you. And I think that, and when I've said that to caregivers, there are some people who will say, because I said early on, I said, "Mama, that just seems kind of selfish." I was about 12 when I finally got the nerve to say it. And she said, "It's not selfish at all." She said, "If you don't take care of you and the need arises for you to take care of somebody else, you're not going to be able to do that." And so that to me, that is the essence of the issue of caregiving is you take care of you, because if you do that, then you'll be able to take care of others. And I
Right.
just think that, I don't know. I joked with Mama one time. I said, "I'm gonna get you a sweatshirt and it's gonna have you take care of you on the front of the sweatshirt." So that's what I'm seeing all the time. So, but
No, that's it's beautiful. And I read that in reading through your book as far as I got. Yeah, it brought tears to my eyes, and just that she held on to that her whole life. And what a powerful message,
yeah,
because most of us aren't brought up, with that idea. And I can proudly say, our daughter, our middle child, moved out on her own, and she was dealing with work and trying to, figure out work balance. And she worked a job where they'd ask her to come in extra shifts, and I kind of imparted on her that idea that, you got to speak up for yourself, and she
right,
got called selfish a little bit. And she got called, "All you think about is yourself." And I said, "No, you have to think about yourself, because nobody else is. You've got to learn this from a young age," because I didn't
right,
want her, many of us, kind of, it's our natural personality to be a caregiver, to be a people pleaser. And so we easily fall into this role, and we can easily put everybody else's needs first. And it can have a really extra burden on those of us who are kind of prone personality wise to that, on top of, when situations happen. So yeah, it's, I love that. I think it's such a powerful little phrase.
Well, at my work, when I'm talking to people, I talk about two types of selfish. I talk about the lowercase selfish and the uppercase self. The
oh,
lowercase is the one you do against somebody else. You're doing it for yourself. The uppercase one is the one I think that is the most important one. And I think whatever way you want to call it, if it's God or whatever, wants you to take care of yourself because you can't do anything else if you don't. And so
right,
I, I, I always talk about that because I think well, 99% of the people I think that get in front of me when I'm doing the work I do are ones that believe in the give without giving back, and you can't keep going that way.
right, right. Well, Gina made a really interesting comment a minute ago about the thing about your daughter and the people who are working with her thinking that she was being selfish and that sort of stuff. A lot of times that comes from people not wanting to change their routine. If here's the things I want to be doing, And if I've got to go in and do some of these things as far as work, then that changes my routine. But if I can get Gina's daughter to come in and do that for me, then things kind of stay the same for me. And really, that's the essence of the stress of caregiving, is that it's one of the most dramatic changes in our lives. I mentioned a little bit earlier that kind of the big picture thing I do is programs for corporations and that sort of thing. And I talk about the perfect workday. The other thing I talk about is change and dealing with change. And the title of the program that I'd present is called "I Didn't Sign On for This: How to Deal with Constant Change in the World and in life. I mean, in the workplace and in life." And that really is the essence of the caregiving experience. It is one of the most dramatic changes in our lives. And as humans, we tend to fight against change. I mean, as living systems, we tend to fight against change. And if this is a change that's going to happen to you, then I think the best thing you can do is try to figure out, okay, how can I deal with this change in such a way that it has less negative impact on me? And that may sound selfish because I keep saying the word me, but you're exactly right, Gina. I mean, if you don't watch out for yourself, then, and especially if you're one of those giving kind of people, then it can just suck all the energy out of you. And after that, I mean, you're done.
Yeah. Yeah. There's nothing you can give to anybody else at that point. So
Exactly. Exactly. And
Yeah,
Gina, I want to compliment, Gina, if I can thank you for a second. Your kind comments about the Caregiving Can Make Life Crazy book. I ended up, and I've started picking up the pace again with this, but I ended up doing about 150 blogs about caregiving. And that's a lot of where the book came from.
right.
Those, connecting with experiences and situations that happen. And if you start looking at life kind of through the lens of caregiving, it's interesting where you can see so many tips. I had an experience yesterday where I was watching an NFL game and they were talking about one of the coaches. I'm trying to remember who it was and what was said, but immediately I thought, this is something that males will connect with in terms of caregiving. And if you start looking at life through kind of a caregiving lens, you see a lot of tips. You see a lot of suggestions on ways to kind of move through it. And when I started doing that, I found that my stress level started going down. It made me feel like I had more control over the caregiving experiences. I mean, I would see tips about caregiving in menus or in a recipe for to fix something, and it would talk about, you need to gently stir these eggs, and so and in life, sometimes you got to kind of just gently deal with those siblings as far as stirring those eggs. But
Yeah, I
but
love
yeah,
that. Yeah, finding it everywhere. Yeah, I'm eager to finish the rest of your book. I didn't get through all of it, but yeah, it's just so conversational and
thank you, thank you.
it's
well, maybe we could, because we could go on with this conversation for a lifetime because there's a lot here. But let's talk just a little bit about your new book, and then we can kind of start wrapping it up somewhat. But just kind of
Sure.
talk about your new book.
Gina kind of hit it on the head a second ago, in which you were talking about it's very conversational. And in the very first part of the book, if you noticed, I mean, I just say the very first thing you read, I say, this is not a normal book. And what I wanted it to be like would be you and me sitting on a porch of a cottage somewhere down at the coast or a cottage up in the mountains, and we're having some refreshment and we're kind of talking about your experience with caregiving, and we're just kind of chatting about it, and me offering some suggestions and have you thought about this and here's some ways to deal with that. And you have done a wonderful job, and thank you so much for backing that up. That's exactly how I wanted folks to take it. But then the number one thing that I mentioned is that the safety of that person you're caring for, that is your number one consideration. Everybody, and you live in North Carolina now, so you'll get this. We all want our loved one to be cared for somewhere like the Biltmore House with world famous physicians and care, and all this other stuff and everything. Um, And all of us can't afford that. What we can do is try to make sure that that person is safe. And if they are safe, everything else is gravy. Everything else is a bonus. And if you look at it like that, then those siblings who say, well, you ought to be doing this or you ought to be doing that, as long as that person's safe, then okay, fine. Then how are you going to help out with this to make some of that stuff happen? And then just kind of walking folks through thinking about these 5 H's and how can you understand the impact caregiving can have on your life and move through it in a positive way. And I'll kind of end my explanation of the book with this. The very end of the book, I talk about the end and I talk about anticipating what the end is going to be. Caregiving is a life experience that while you're in the middle of it, it feels like it's endless, but it isn't. And there's going to be a day that more than likely that this caregiving experience ends. And you need to kind of start planning ahead a little bit about and the issues of legal stuff and what you're going to do with stuff and all, what's going to happen. And then how are you going to take care of yourself? Because there's going to be, here's one of the things I find so intriguing. And this happened to me and happened to Joe, my brother. When the end came, it was almost as if it wasn't that we were glad that the end had come, but Mama was better off. Daddy was better off when it happened, and we were better off. And there's a guilt that can come with that feeling. And you've got to cut yourself a little bit of slack and just and move through it and do it in a positive way. So thank you for your comments again about the book. Y'all have been a delight. Hope we get a chance to talk again in the future.
Yeah, no, we've really enjoyed having you on here, Mike, and both books you've written, and sounds like you've done a lot of other common sense things as far as before you got into the caregiving world about, workplace and how to help people get through their day and make the most of things. But we appreciate you being here and sharing your experience too, because I think that's kind of what helps people the most, the relatable experiences and someone who's gone through it themselves to know, now with my dad having Parkinson's and this, I mean, I can relate so easily to the patients' families that I'm working with. And I know they appreciate that to the point where they'll like, how's your dad doing? Well, he was still living or things like that. But making that connection with people to help
you want me to finish it?
Yeah, I'm getting stuck on my words now.
I'll say this, that one of the interesting things you just mentioned, though, is the connection. There were a couple of studies done with people who are professional caregivers, they go and staying with folks on an hourly basis and that sort of thing. And they found that if the professional caregiver reached out to a family member, not the person they're caring for, but to a family member, and they would ask every now and then, how are you doing? How are you holding up? They found that the family member rated that professional caregiver higher on satisfaction surveys. So
I'm sure.
a lot of times the programs that I do sometimes for professional caregiving companies, I tell them up front, I say, you need to be asking the family member, how are you doing? Just, and what they'll do is they'll rate their satisfaction level higher. So, but yeah, it's easy for the caregiver to be that invisible patient, people just forget them.
It's a good description.
Now, Mike, you had mentioned you wanted to offer your Care 101 book, and I wanted to let you offer that if you wish.
Sure. Any one of your viewers who would like a free e-copy of Caregiver 101, I'd be delighted to send it to them. I know they have they'll be seeing my email address, that contact@caregivingcraziness.com. They'll see that email address, and all they got to do is email me. I'll be delighted to send them a free e-copy of Caregiver 101, and I'd be glad to help.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, we'll share all that in the notes here. Whether you're looking at this on YouTube or anywhere you listen to a podcast, we always share those notes and those information and links to where you can learn more about Mike and the work he's done and his books for sure. So thank you for being here with us, and thank you for all of our listeners who've been here today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it with a friend. Like Mike said, more than half of us out there are acting as caregivers. And so surely if you're not, someone who could benefit from hearing this conversation. Leave us a note, send us feedback about this. Be sure to tune in. I do a Ask the OT session on YouTube where I talk about answering people's questions and caring for aging loved ones. We've got one coming up December 2nd at 7 p.m. and December 11th at 12 noon. Those are Eastern times. Be sure to tune in for Don's EFT tapping that he does online. He's got sessions on there that you can view, and it's something he's going to be getting back to as he's regaining his language skills from recovering from a stroke. And you can learn all more about us and everything we've done here at focusedhealthyfamily.com. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, again on YouTube, and tune in every Thursday when we air one of our podcasts. And remember, how you speak to your children and your loved ones today shapes their future and yours.